The latest on the constitutional standoff in Catalonia. As the Senate in Madrid votes to take back control, the Parliament in Barcelona votes for independence. Meanwhile, under the radar, a spotlight is shone on American special operations in Niger. We investigate the secret world of counter-terrorism across Africa. Now, in the White House Rose Garden this week, President Trump was asked to comment on the details of the death of 4 US soldiers in Niger earlier this month. Rather than give details of why they were there or what happened, he talked about the difficult task of making condolence calls to the families, something he believed other presidents didn't do. He mentioned Barack Obama, and then that became the news. Then there was the back and forth tweets about the nature of his call to David Johnson's widow, and the fallout with a Democratic representative who was with the widow and talked about the president's lack of empathy. And somehow we never really found out what happened in Niger and why US soldiers were there. So we talked to Dr. Joseph Fitsanakis, who's an associate professor at the Intelligence and National Security Program at Coastal Carolina University. I asked him first of all about the US military presence in Africa.
What's been told to us is that there are about 5,000 to 6,000 troops, American troops in Africa. I would say that most of them are actually in the Northwest. There's about 20 countries that we have confirmed the presence of American troops, but the majority of those, particularly special forces, are in places like Somalia and Chad, Libya. We know there are at least 800 troops in Niger, and these are mostly special forces troops.
So what are the special forces operations in Niger going to be, do you think?
Special forces typically are engaged in combat that requires unconventional tactics. And so we're talking about things like night raids, assassinations, kidnappings. However, I don't think any of this is going on in a large scale in Niger or places around Niger. I think most of these troops at the moment, what they're doing is advising, assisting, they're probably training local forces, African forces. And I don't think they're taking part in combat. That would be very atypical of prior examples of American intervention in Africa.
So what do you think was going on in the operation where David Johnson was killed?
I don't think that had to do anything with combat. I think they were collecting intelligence and that they were actually there to support a local force of Nigerian troops. And that's when they actually came under attack. In fact, it wasn't just the American troops that were hurt. There were many local troops that were hurt in that ambush as well. And they were meeting with some elders in a local village.
So why was there a 2-day delay in getting Johnson's body recovered? And why was there a French intervention necessary to get these troops lifted?
The Americans don't have a long history of intervention in Africa, particularly West Africa. In those places, Chad, Niger, the Francophone Africa, the French are the ones that are the most knowledgeable outside force when it comes to military affairs. They have a much larger, better educated force than the Americans when it comes to the local conditions. I'm not surprised at all that the French took the lead in the recovery of the body.
Why, though, the reluctance, Joseph, to be more explicit about this, perhaps particularly on the part of President Trump? What is it? If it's about intelligence gathering and national security, is that the reason for keeping this below the radar?
Yes. I don't think that the United States at this moment wants the world to know the extent of its involvement in Northwest Africa. It is becoming increasingly clear to those of us who pay attention to those issues that Al-Qaeda is regrouping in West Africa, and so that would definitely prepare the conditions, I think, for increasing American involvement. But remember that the American population is not exactly ecstatic about American intervention anywhere. Second, it's had a pretty bad experience when it comes to intervention in Central Asia and, of course, in the Middle East. And so it's not easy for a president to argue in favor of sending troops abroad, particularly when they're coming home in body bags.
But do you think there's now a balance where special operations, commandos, SEALs, for example, are moving into territory that previously would have been the CIA's domain?
This is a phenomenon that we've seen for the last 10 years or so, increasing cooperation and increasing overlap between CIA and special forces. Remember that the raid that killed bin Laden in Abbottabad in Pakistan was performed by special forces troops. It was detailed to the CIA. Typically what I think will happen is that the CIA will be in control of those missions, but they will be increasingly performed by special forces troops, especially in a place like Africa, because Africa is not your typical intelligence gathering territory. It's actually very unconventional. The landscape is very inhospitable, very sort of unforgiving. And so you want people in there that have a lot of combat experience. And the CIA typically doesn't do that kind of stuff.
Dr. Joseph Fitsanakis there.
92 to 95 FM, 810 medium wave, and on digital radio. BBC Radio Scotland.